We'll just wait for 2 more minutes and then we'll start. I hope everybody, all the participants, and including you, Ananta, you have joined with at least a cup of tea or coffee with you. It's a very tea time webinar that we are having right now, and
I
likewise
have
on a Saturday.
I have my water right here. And
That's
I'm gonna
great.
yeah.
In fact, I hope all the teachers and the educators, everybody who has joined, you all have come with your teas and coffees so that
Correct.
yeah, you have that refresher uh, uh, pack
And
with
then the
you.
weather is so nice these days in terms of monsoon hitting most parts of the country.
Yeah,
Having this, it's raining a lot. Whether you look at Delhi,
yeah.
Ahmedabad, Pune, Maharashtra, everywhere,
Yeah.
it's raining, beautiful
Typical
weather.
social science people, right? Start with the conversation with the monsoons. All right, so
Always.
let's start the webinar.
Yes. Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar. We are here to challenge some long-standing assumptions about how social sciences are taught, and more importantly, how students really think about them. This session is not about adding more to your plate. I'm sure as teachers, you have a lot going on, but it's about shifting how we use something already in our toolkit. Questions. We explore how to move from asking students what they remember to uncovering how they reason, what they misunderstand, how to guide them to deeper learning, and we will show you how EI asset can help in making this shift, which is aligned to the vision of NEP 2020. So let's begin by
Yeah.
challenging uh, what we think about how we understand social science learning overall.
All right, I'll start with sharing my screen. Um, okay, can you see my screen, Anta?
It's showing, yeah, the first
All right.
webinar page is showing. So,
Yes, and again, warm welcome to everyone. Ananta will now take you all through the agenda.
sure. So, in this webinar, we are primarily looking at these 5 core areas. Here is like a sort of a roadmap for our today's session. We start by identifying what is the core problem with social sciences when it's often assessed. Like, then we explore how EI asset reframes that assessment to reveal students' thinking. Now, then we go next, we look at 4 powerful questions type that align with the NEP competencies. And then the real misconception, how they get uncovered. So through the questions, we will be discussing the question, the responses the students have given. And from that response, the students' misconceptions, what they reveal, we will discuss at length. And finally, we will share how to start applying this in our classrooms the right way. So I guess rather than not wasting any time more, let's dive in. Okay. Now, when we look at the image, um, what does it remind you? What does it make you think? This image actually is more familiar than we do like. It's what happens a lot of times. When we talk to students across the country, often the perception with social science is attached with, we have to learn about maps, you have to learn dates, and it becomes sort of learning becomes reduced to memorizing just definitions, events. So, but as teachers, as social science enthusiasts, we know that social science is supposed to be passive. It's meant to help students make sense of the world, question systems, and empathize with perspectives different from their own. Unfortunately, the way we often assess social science is through recall questions that shuts down deeper thinking. So often when we see papers, we are looking at recalling dates, defining what happened in an event, and not really pushing the student to analyze, to put on their perspective, to sort of share what they think uh, stands out in an event. Uh, this session is about changing that, changing
Right.
the commonly held perceptions about social sciences, and
So,
we'll explore how asking the right kind of questions, the kind that EI asset helps us design, that can reveal what students really are thinking of, and how through these questions we understand the misconceptions and build
right,
the NEP aligned skills which we truly care about. The
right.
ideas
In
of,
fact, yeah,
yeah,
I'd like to
sure, go ahead.
just share
Yeah.
a train of thought because I know I tend to. Along with that, in fact, more than EI asset questions, we have to, as the session's theme says, that we need to shift our perspective and the way we look at social sciences and humanities in general, any of the humanities subjects, as fields where reasoning and critical thinking and problem solving, it is such an inherent part of understanding a history chapter or understanding a geography chapter or understanding a civics chapter, to be able to problem solve. Public administration too is part of the humanities, and how do you solve the problems, basic problems like potholes on the roads or the traffic jams, or um, unable to reach one destination to the other destination, from one end to the other end, in an easier way, in a more comfortable way, in a cheaper way. All of these are general, all of these are actual problems that we all face every day. And humanities teach us that. Humanities actually require reasoning skills in students. And it comes back to, all the onus is on the teachers, on the educators. And because I will use the word, and Anindita used the right word, enthusiasts. We are humanities enthusiasts because the onus and responsibility is on us to help our students stop thinking, change that way of thinking of taking humanities as general knowledge, bringing them out of the recall based questioning, and whether it's competency based questions or competency based education or competency based lesson planning. Actually, we'll take you through competence, how do you plan your lesson and revolve it around a particular competency or group of competencies you want to inculcate and encourage through, teach through a particular chapter. Towards the end of the session, we'll actually show you a lesson plan. Um, on all of it, we have tried to ensure that it's more NEP aligned, because NEP thinks and wants students, in fact, NEP wants students to think along. How do you develop a particular skill in a subject? And that's what this picture, as Anindita said, that's what the picture is all about. That so far it has always been learn these maps, learn these definitions, remember the dates, and that's what I think more or less, I mean, when we were students ourselves, we pretty much depended on rote recall, and it's more or less it's in continuation right now. It's continuing across schools across India. So this is what we are going to do. Look at some competencies that NEP talks about. Look at questions created to check those competencies, and then how can we use those questions and create an entire lesson plan out of it. Make humanities interdisciplinary. That's what we are going to do through this session. Ananta, over to you.
Absolutely agree, Saika. The idea is to push for reasoning, reflection, and real world relevance. After all, if humanities students don't really, push the envelope, who else will? Well,
True.
I would just take a moment to introduce my colleague Saika and I are here to help you make social science instructions more meaningful, diagnostic, and inquiry based. We both work with teachers across different grades and have seen how small changes in questioning can produce big changes in student engagement and understanding. I'm Dr. Ananyata Tagore. I have done a PhD in sociology from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. I've presented in international forums that includes in Germany, in Brazil, in France. And post my PhD, I joined education initiatives where I deliver workshops for government and private school educators, focusing on learning outcomes, assessment design, and social science education. I've also collaborated with Government of Nagaland, CISCE, and CPSC, focusing on improving class 10th and class 12th examination. My colleague Saika Sultan is a seasoned educator, curriculum designer, and an assessment specialist with over 20 years of experience in K-12 education. She currently leads social science content team and has led board reform initiatives at educational initiatives. She has worked closely with national and state boards like CBSE, NBSC, and the Haryana board. Saika brings a sharp focus on competency based assessment, inclusive pedagogy, and a teacher capacity building. Her work blends classroom insights with large scale education strategy, aiming to make assessments meaningful for both students and teachers. Over to you, Saika.
Yeah, I'm just going to say fancy words, too many big words. We are
Yeah,
just two social science enthusiasts ourselves.
yes, correct.
And basically, what we do is we create skill based content questions for students. We check um, the learning gaps students have in particular concepts across humanities from K-12 students, and we also are it's like a lifelong mission to help teachers teach better, understand the concepts better. In fact, understand how to check skills through the concepts that they teach. Actually, that's the right way to say. Understand how to assess students on the concept that they teach in the classrooms. That's what we are basically. We like to work with students and we like to work with teachers. So let's move on to the next slide. I'll take over. Thank you so much, Ananta. So let me just hide the meeting controls. Okay, so NEP, the National Education Policy 2020, what does it ask of us? Um, these are the buzzwords floating around nowadays a lot, skill-based assessments. And what do we mean when we say skills and competencies? So when it comes to social sciences, and that's what we're going to focus on. When it comes to social sciences, the foundational skill no one can deny is recall. That's the foundational skill that we check when we create a question paper. When you create a question paper, it has to be balanced. It has to have a number of recall questions, a number of understanding a little bit harder questions, the connected to certain skills. And then you have application questions where students are asked to apply the knowledge that they have studied in the classroom, what you have taught them in a particular situation. Those are higher order thinking skill questions, that is application questions. So then where do these skills come in? Critical thinking and logical reasoning, that is one of the first and core skills above the foundation of recall that students need to develop through the social science concepts. Critical thinking is when, for example, we teach, say, in class 10, we teach dictatorship through Nazism. And if, for example, students have studied Nazism and so you have taught Nazism, rise of Hitler, you have taught them what all steps Hitler took to be able to become the dictator that he was and rule the country with an iron fist. You have taught that concept in the classroom. Critical thinking will come in when you give an example of, say, North Korea, and you say that you have studied dictatorship in this particular chapter, and now I'm giving you another example here. This example is just to check, you give a small paragraph on how North Korea is being ruled. And you ask students from this passage, from this paragraph of say 5 to 6 sentences, tell me, find those sentences or words that hint at North Korea being a dictatorship. If the student is able to identify that squashing of dissent, controlling of press, uh, there are many others, no voting, no elections, consistently one person ruling and their children ruling, it becomes kind of a cycle, a regime of one line of authoritarian leaders. So if a child is able to identify those markers that from the passage that makes North Korea a dictatorship, your objective is achieved. Objective is to simply ask, what does a dictator do? What do they need to rise to power? That is critical thinking, to be able to bring a cohesion, to be able to pull those threads that you taught them in the classroom, pull them, those threads, and apply it. Connect those threads that you have given in the question, tie a knot, and say that, you know what, this is the circle that I've created. These two things show me that this is a dictatorship. Logical reasoning, critical thinking and logical reasoning. I mean, where does critical thinking stop and logical reasoning begin? So that's one, which is why I've kept critical thinking, logical reasoning together. Very important skill. Second is, or for example, so evidence-based interpretation of events. Evidence-based interpretation of events would be where we are going to, where you give a particular primary source of information, something that happened in history. For example, a propaganda poster from World War One, or the letters exchanged between Mahatma Gandhi and Hitler, where he talks about satyagraha and peace, and what Hitler says in his letter as a response to Mahatma Gandhi. So when you pick up a primary source of evidence, a primary source of information, use it, it's authentic, it's real, it's original, and hand it over to the child in the form of a question. You say that, now I'm giving you these two pieces of letters and they're widely available. And then you create a question. Ask them to tell you the difference between the chain of thought that Mahatma Gandhi's letter is trying to, the ideas that he's trying to highlight, as opposed to what Hitler is trying to say. The moment you're able to bring that foil, um, what gets highlighted? One, the positivity that you will find in the letters and the ideas that Mahatma Gandhi was sharing, and the opposite ideas that complete opposite ideas that Hitler was trying to share. This is evidence-based interpretation of events. And a leader talking about those ideas, what happened, and how he was able to free a country, and a leader, a person with those opposite ways of thinking, those ideas that he implemented, what happened to that country? So this is evidence-based interpretation of events. We have to bring in those primary sources of information. For example, from class 6 teachers, if we have any of the class 6 teachers in the participants today, riverine civilizations. There was just not one civilization at one point of time rising next to rivers. There was a collection of civilizations rising next to rivers only. Evidence. What does the evidence suggest? We look at the primary sources of evidence or artifacts that we have found, the archaeologists have found, where grains have been found and granaries have been found. And granaries are not just found in the Indus Valley civilization, granaries were found everywhere. Any civilization that rose next to a river will have granaries, will have those crops. And that's what makes the child think. So you can connect your evidence-based interpretation of events question to your critical thinking, because they are thinking critically. They are analyzing that piece of information. Okay, if granaries were found everywhere across the Huangho civilization, Mesopotamian civilization, Indus Valley civilization, if granaries were found here, Egyptian civilization, then what is that commonality between them? They were farmers. Where would farmers most likely want to settle? They would want to settle next to rivers. And that's where you bring in geography, how geography shapes our civilizations. So that's your evidence-based interpretation of events. Moving on to ethical and civic understanding. Governance and civic engagement, they go hand in hand, especially in a democracy. Uh, a lot of countries, several countries actually across the world are democratic countries now. They have federalism, then they have other social structures, and how ethics and civic sense they go hand in hand. Where ethics are so important when it comes to voting, where civic understanding comes in when you are worried about the state of the roads. You're worried about the time you take and other people take when it comes to traffic jams, where you're worried about flood situation. Why is it happening in my city? That ethical reasoning, making them global citizens, citizens who worry. So here is where you bring in your problem solving skills and you ask them questions that, you know what, Mumbai and Pune, they had flood situations recently and it happens during the monsoons. Tell me how would we, this is the infrastructure that Mumbai has, this is the infrastructure that Pune has. Tell me how you would solve this problem. That's your ethical and civic understanding. Moving on from there, governance systems. System thinking is another thing that NEP talks about. Governance, how are, it's all about policies, how about policies made, laws made, and how uh, asking questions and opposing laws that you are unhappy with or reviewing those laws is so important. That's why ethical and civic understanding is right next to systems thinking. Because as ethical and educated citizens of the country, we will ask questions on the policies and the laws that the government is making, and it's our right to do that. And we wrap it up with perspectives, taking, empathy for diverse narratives. This is where culture comes in. Social and cultural norms. Are we respectful towards other cultures? If we've come across, and we were recently discussing about that, if we come across a Haka dance, say from in New Zealand, what do you, how do you go about understanding it? Or is your first reaction to something like that is fear, that, oh my God, that's so scary? No, you open your mind and you embrace other cultures because it is a global village that we live in. So cross-cultural connections and how you, it's cultural relativism, that's what we call it in humanities, where you relate to other cultures by opening your mind. And this is what, these are the strings of pearls that NEP has embedded in, it's this beautiful document that makes for, towards the end of the learning cycle after 12th, they become global citizens. I took a bit of time here because this has to be understood as to what skills are we trying to check when we are teaching in the classroom and we are assessing in a question papers. Um, just
Like I
want
have a
to,
question here. I have a
yes,
question here.
yeah.
When we are teaching, do you think like in not in terms of your personal point of view, but our students, are we truly developing them? Like we must, as teachers, also ask, are we making questions in our classroom which actually sort of develop or are activating these abilities?
Yeah.
Because if we are
That's
not,
a good question. That's a good question,
yeah,
Anvita. And I'm sure that a lot of teachers are thinking that how do we do it? We want
correct,
to do it,
correct,
but how do we do it? And
exactly.
that's relevant because we are going to show you those such questions in the next upcoming slides. I'm sure teachers are doing their work. You
Mm,
cannot teach humanities without thinking of the cultural repercussions of something, or how
mm,
a decision takes, how a decision affects the society at large or the community at large.
mm.
Humanities teachers must be thinking about that. I think the core question here is how do we ask such questions and ensure
True.
that we are aligned to NEP and we are doing justice to the curriculum. That using the curriculum, how do I ask that such a question to develop those skills? And we are going to show you such questions in the upcoming slides. So moving on, I just request all the participants if you can just send us your questions, use the Q&A chat box, and please send us your questions. We'll try to take up as many as we can towards the end of the session. Thank you so much. So what skill-based social science questions, what can they do? You see an iceberg here. This illustration is for a purpose, and that is what you see in the red zone. If we ask a recall question, every time that we ask a recall question, and I want to specify here and clarify, recall questions are not bad question. I began the session by saying that recall is foundational skills for humanities. If they don't know about the history of the country, they don't know about what happened in ancient India, medieval India, they will not be able to understand modern India. So foundational skill is very important of recall. But we need to ask ourselves what kind of recall questions are we asking. So one what students answer is in the red zone, and we get surface level answer. Say this is what I recall from the information I read in the textbooks, and I'm going to repeat that particular definition. Students are brilliant at that. They write beautifully, I mean, and they write good answers, but they are all repetition of something that they have memorized from the textbooks. Now what we don't see through recall questions is we are not able to dive into what were the logic that they were using when they wrote that particular answer. What were the thinking when they wrote that particular answer? Why can't we do that? Because the question in itself does not ask them to do it. If we ask them an analysis question, but the answer we are expecting is a description of something, that's recall. If you're asking them, because analyze is a very fancy Bloom's verb that we use sometimes to say that this is an HOTS question. But sometimes when you ask analysis is when you compare two things and you give your analysis, your insights from two disparate things. That's analysis. But if you ask an analysis question and expect and give marks to a description answer, then you are doing a disservice to the student. That you will only understand the blue portion, the misconceptions that you will find out, the gaps in learning, where you were not able to complete the communication cycle of transacting that, teaching that particular concept in the classroom. The reasoning, you will not be able to get it if you ask a recall question. So what do these recall questions look like? We'll come to that. First of all, let's look at these four skills that are very important and aligned with NEP that we must start asking using in the question papers. One is a question based on cause and effect. So what is cause and effect? Cause and effect is a very history, and actually it is it's subject agnostic, but especially in history we see something caused an event, and this was the effect of that, and this was the repercussion. So like for example, what caused the 1857 revolt? Cause effect. Usually students learn something on like economic reasons, economic causes, sorry, religious causes, etc., etc., etc. And then what was the effect of that? The effect was that people revolted against the British rule. That is your cause and effect reasoning. But again, how are we asking those questions? Are we making them recall, heavy recall questions where they have to write 5 reasons, 5 causes, repercussions, what happened after that? Huge, massive chunk of answers students are writing, all wrote and memorized. So that is one thing that we need to be aware of when we are creating questions. What kind of questions are we asking? Then systems thinking, we have talked about it. We talk about governance, we talk about economy, we talk about society systems, how are they working in the community, in the country. Then we come to perspectives and source analysis. Source analysis in history is extremely important. Not a random image, not a random GPT created image. We don't want that. You pick up an actual thing, an actual poster, an actual illustration, an actual letter, an artifact that was found in a particular period of time, pick it up, put it in the question, and then you say that, okay, this image, what does it tell you? Tell me, as a historian, what does this image tell you? So that is perspective and source analysis. Moving on to ethical and civic reasoning. We have already talked about that, being worried about the society and coming up with solutions to it. So let's just quickly look at one such question that is on the screen in front of you. This question is an EI asset question. Uh, so I have tagged it to a particular, the first competency that we were talking about. It's the causal reasoning. There was a cause and there was an effect. Um, it is about permanent settlement, zamindari system. I would really request teachers and participants to attempt the question, see which one is the correct answer. Where 44% of students have chosen option B as the correct answer. So let me take you through the question. The question says permanent settlement. The cause was that an event happened. Permanent settlement was implemented in the country or zamindari system, and then revenues were collected from the zamindars, the native Indians, and they were landowners. These are the keywords I'm stressing. Then the taxes were fixed. There was a provision, there was a caveat to it, that if you're collecting those taxes, a portion of the taxes you can keep with yourself. That's what the British government told the zamindars. And then majority of the taxes went to the East India Company. Now, the question says, which of these outcomes affect? Which of these outcomes most logically followed the zamindari system introduced under the 1793 Permanent Settlement Act? First one says it encouraged a shift to growing cash crops to maximize profits. Logic here is if I'm keeping a portion of the taxes myself, I might as well increase the profits. That's a logical reasoning, thread of thought. Second one says it benefited the landless farmers as the tax burden was lifted. The passage says that landowners were asked to take the taxes. So students have to be, they have to be very, it's very clear in the passage that landowners will benefit. They will increase their profits. They will get something out of the taxes that they collect. Option two is clearly wrong. That cannot be an outcome. Then the third one says it created an Indian landed class that supported British authority. Logically, they would want to support British authority because they are getting some money out of the whole act. Then it created a burden on the farmers who worked as unproductive land. Did it increase the burden on the farmers? Yes, it did. They had to pay taxes. One, they had no land. Then they had to pay enormous amounts of taxes. The zamindars took majority, and the landless farmers did not have anything with them. So possible answer, the correct answer is B. 134 are correct. 44% students, it's great to see that they chose the correct answer. But if you look at C and D, 2 was chosen by option 2, which was clearly wrong. Logically, it does not make sense that how can landless farmers earn something from here. But option 2 was chosen by 22% of students as well as 20% of students. If you see, almost 44%, 42% of students have chosen 2, one, all of the above, and option C. So here you have half the class is choosing the correct answer and half the class is not choosing the correct answer. Here you can have a very rich conversation with the students as to why the logic failed and why the landless laborers or landless farmers will be the people who won't be able to benefit from the system. Moving on to the next question. This is a recall question, by the way, on your screen. It checks a very foundational, enduring learning outcome, very essential concept in civics. India, like many other countries, follows the parliamentary system of democratic governance. Students need to know parliamentary system here. This is why it's recall. They need to know. They need to recall what is parliamentary system of democratic governance. They need to recall what is a democracy. It's a fair ask for class 8 students. Which of the following statements about India's government is true then? If they are following a parliamentary system of democratic governance, what is true? Option A, students 20, almost 23% students chose the head of government is also the head of state. So here, what is a misconception that you are checking? Head of government and head of state. They are two very different people. They are two very different roles that are played in a democratic nation. This is a misconception. Then, legislative branch exercises some control over the executive branch. Let's pause here. So that is one option. The other option says all members of the parliament are chosen through direct election by popular vote. Here we have to rethink. Direct all members of the parliament. What do your students have to keep in mind here? All members of the parliament are chosen through direct election by popular vote. They are not. They are not. Not all members of the parliament. Then option D says the executive branch is independent of the judicial and legislative branches. Nobody is independent. They all check system of checks and balances. They all have some role to play over each other. So option B is the correct answer. But you see that how it's divided, how the question checks particular learning apps, checks a particular skill as well. All members of the parliament, they really have to read the question to be able to come to the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. Take a moment to read this particular question. It's on the screen. You'll see how it's source independence. It's dependent on a source by the historian Ibn al-Athir. It's on Tatars, and there's a particular reason why, specific reason why it was given to class 10 students. If we have class 10 teachers amongst our mix, the Tatars were a people. It's a very factual, name-driven, name-heavy passage. We have the Tatars. They were a people. They came from China, attacked cities around modern-day Kazakhstan. Then they advanced to northeast Iran. Then they kept marching on, went to Iraq, destroying, killing most of its inhabitants. All this in less than a year. The sentence says after that, the excerpt and a primary source of information provides an explanation regarding developments related to Black Death, a worldwide epidemic of plague at the time. Which of the following developments does it most likely provide an explanation for? Which of the following developments does it provide an explanation for? A is why plague, which originated in Asia, spread rapidly to the Middle East. Why plague caused more deaths in the Middle East and Europe than in Asia. Why plague was thought to be caused by supernatural forces or earthquakes. And why those who survived the plague found an improvement in their economic situation. 40%, 36% of students, they chose option A as the correct answer. That's great because that is the correct answer. Option B was chosen by 35%, I mean, almost equal number of students, they chose option B. Now, interesting thing here is they were not able to interpret the source at all. The 35.3% of students, or actually the majority of the class, if you take in B, C, and D cumulatively, they were not able to interpret and understand the source at all. It says very, it's earthquake is not given, supernatural forces not given, economic situation, I don't think anything has to do with economic situation. Europe, I don't know why students would think that Europe would be a particular answer here, because possibly they thought Black Death and they connected it to the medieval time Black Death that Europe faced. But perhaps that's what happened. But they were doing guesswork here. They were using the pre-existing knowledge and trying to answer this particular question, which is not what the skill is checking for. This skill is source interpretation and historical inference. You need to infer from it. Now, why does A become the correct answer? A becomes the correct answer because it says the excerpt provides an explanation regarding development of Black Death. It originated a worldwide epidemic of plague at the time. So plague originated in Asia, spread rapidly to the Middle East. They came from China. They went to Kazakhstan. You can see the trajectory if you can think of the world map in your head. They came from China. They went to Kazakhstan. They went towards Iran. They went towards Iraq. So you see how an epidemic is spreading across from Asia to the Middle East. And this particular question was asked, specifically was given to class 10 students because they study globalization. And globalization talks about, I mean, as recent as COVID-19, right? Epidemic, movement of people, a chain of series of movements happening, and that's what's happening, right? The plague is spreading. Um, and globalization also talks about how certain diseases were brought in from different continents to other continents, and when they were colonized, almost half of the animals and human beings they were decimated. So there was a reason. So you have globalization, that's your topic. The skill being checked here is source interpretation and historical inference. But what are you trying to test the child? It's an actual topic in the chapter globalization, that when Europeans came to Africa, they brought certain diseases with them, and because of which half of the population of Africa was wiped out. That's a core learning outcome in that chapter. If you ask that particular instance, that becomes recall. What happened, why it happened. It's a recall. Great, they know it. But can they apply the skill of source interpretation and tell me the same thing here? I'm asking the same thing. How epidemics follow when people move from nation to nation without any checks. When they follow, this is what happens when people come in contact with each other. Same learning outcome, but checked through something that is NEP aligned. Source interpretation.
And it also has unfamiliar context. Unless
Correct.
we
Thank
kind
you for
of
saying
not
that. Yeah.
apply the concept in different settings, how will we actually know whether we have learned something or not? How will we know
Mm.
whether the students have developed the understanding or not? So this is
Yeah.
an absolute unfamiliar sort of a setting that we can give to the student, and let's
Mm.
check whether they have done rote learning or they have understood the topic, because after all this is not about dates, it's about insight, and
Mm.
that's a powerful shift we can make in the social science assessment.
We bring reasoning in the classroom. So this is
Correct.
ethical and civic reasoning in public service that I was talking about. The question asks, and this is a satire, where we have which of the following ideas is depicted through this cartoon? Um, where the reporter, you have someone, the two people discussing, and then one person says, "Sir, this pothole has been around for so long, UNESCO has granted it World Heritage status." Now, The question is, which of the following ideas is depicted through this cartoon? Students, and if you look at the percentage, the data that we have on this particular question, the correct answer is civic authorities neglecting basic services. It's a satire. But students, if you look at option one, drainage system is something that students study in class 6 in terms of rivers. And drainage system invariably gets connected to the term river, because how else would you explain where all the river flows? So you say that the drainage system of Ganga, or drainage system of, say, Kaveri, or a drainage system of Indus, the catchment area, the area where the river flows. So they connected drainage system with in their heads with drains. They connected drains to potholes, and that's why they chose option A. Second, option B, they chose because of nothing but pattern recognition. They just matched it with World Heritage status. They looked at that term and they looked at this term, this phrase, World Heritage Site, and 32% of students they chose this particular option. They did nothing, they just did matching. A lot of students do that. They look at a question. If the question is a little bit of it's contextual and is text heavy, they copy half of the question in their answers and they leave it at that. This is what students do. And if you make this question a part of your own lesson plan, and you start maybe a local governance, a local government, or local urban government, or local rural government chapter with this question as part of your lesson plan, then it shifts the classroom. It shifts the students' way of thinking as well. That what am I even being asked here? So challenging what students think they know to reasoning in the class. Um, if I think we have a lot of questions coming in. We will be taking those towards the end of the session. Ananta, over to you.
Yes. Now, I when we look at this slide, we basically want to sort of highlight about misconceptions that students have are not really mistakes. The slides is what we often don't see when we look at students' wrong answers. Each of these 6 points that you see on your screen represents a different kind of thinking pattern behind a misconception we can surface and we can teach more effectively. So, whenever a student is answering incorrectly, it is not always to do with, let's say, guesswork or confusion. It also could be highlighting something that they have misunderstood or they have some parallel incorrect conception. Let's say, for example, prior knowledge conflicts. Sometimes students bring in informations they have learned earlier, maybe from another subject or from outside the classroom, and it clashes with what is currently being taught. In today's time and age, we have phones, we have friends, we have social media, we have all sorts of avenues from where we consume information, and students are no different. So, these kind of um, prior knowledge conflict often makes students answer a question incorrectly. Sometimes it's surface level association, like they may latch onto some familiar terms in the question or options, assuming that recognition equals to understanding. Like Saika was discussing about pattern recognition, because the cartoon had the word UNESCO heritage, and in one of the option the same words are used, students immediately sort of thought, okay, because it's there in the cartoon, maybe this is the correct answer, without really putting an effort in analyzing the cartoon and what's truly asking. So, this surface level of association is done mostly by students who are in a hurry to answer or complete the paper. Sometimes it's misapplied logic. Like students may apply reasoning patterns that make sense in one context, like science or math, but fall apart in historical or civic domain. Um, just to give you a classic example, 2 plus 2 is 4, and that is universal wherever you go. But it is not necessary that in democracy, the way India operates, democracy also has different type of settings. There could be parliamentary democracy, there could be presidential democracy, and one we cannot really, one is better than the other. And students study different kinds of systems, political systems. So just because something makes sense in one particular place, that doesn't not mean that that is the only system that exists. So like I was saying, that in case in a subject, because every subject follows its own logic. So similarly, when we talk about subjects like science and maths, their way of concept building may not be the same logic that social science, or let's say languages. Let's say in English, we have, G-O is go, but T-O doesn't follow the same sound. It is to. So this is what happens when we apply logic of one particular subject in another. And students often do that without sometimes realizing. Overgeneralization is also common in social sciences, assuming like all systems behave the same, or all the historical revolts follow the same pattern, which is not the case. Especially when we are looking at the aspect of cause and effect, the time which existed in 1857, the same cause and same situation did not exist when the non-cooperation movement took place, and same situation did not exist when the Quit India movement took place. Each time and event on its own had different social, political, economic, uh, situations in terms of geographies are concerned. Then guessing under uncertainty. Many a times students faced with unfamiliar phrasing, especially a lot of times when students first language is not English, and they are more comfortable with their, let's say, mother tongue or some other language, they they often don't understand or not able to comprehend the question. Like when we saw the question of Tartars, it's an unfamiliar um, source. So when the student reads an unfamiliar source for the first time, many of them, because they are reading it for the first time, often fail to comprehend it correctly. They kind of get distracted, or distracted in the sense that they really kind of fail to understand or analyze it and understand the insight it's trying to bring. So when we were reading, there was mention of Kazakhstan, Iraq, Iran, but students answered or going for options of Europe and Asia, which was never, like Saika was mentioning, it was not even discussed in the excerpt. So when we are like sort of overgeneralizing, or when we are guessing under uncertainty, students often make that mistakes. Again, revealing a reasoning gap. And lastly, there is instructional gaps. Sometimes the issue isn't there at all. It's a misconcept or something we haven't taught enough in the class. The point here is that each misconception gives us an insight. With diagnostic questions, we just we just don't test the learning. We are also kind of making them, giving them an exposure that how much social sciences question can be made in terms of, from the same concept of globalization, a question like this can also come up. And that's also a key of doing this webinar, to teach all of you, to help all of you sort of advocate for these kind of questions so that students start engaging with the subject. Unless we make our subject interesting, engaging, relevant, and with the times, students would often find it static and kind of limit themselves to, learning the dates, events, maps, without putting an effort in actually going deeper what the subject can offer. Like, just to give you an example, we see this question. Now there is a map of China given, clearly showing the 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 physical, where the mountains is, where the rivers are. You can see completely. And then there is, the question is asked. Shown here are locations of China's main geographical feature. Based on this, Which of the following maps uh, likely shows the region in China with the highest population density? Now, this is a well crafted question which can unlock the kind of reasoning NEP envisions. This map based question is deeply, deceptive. It is simple for sure, in the sense that it asks students to choose which region of China is most densely populated based on its physical features. But look at the map and notice what it's trying to do. It first activates the cause and effect reasoning. Then it makes a student to go beyond the surface level recall, like naming the rivers, and instead what it does is make them analyze where the rivers, plains, how the terrain might shape the people's life. And then it exposes the student in the sense of they have to apply their mind and then answer this, which exposes a common misconception. Like many students assume the biggest or the most central regions are the most populated. That signals a gap in understanding how physical geography actually influences human settlements. Like, finally, see how it is easy to reframe the textbook content instead of asking, name the rivers in China. We often see when you look at any publication, the chapter book, in any chapter, end of the chapter question, name this, define that, explain this. So rather than asking something like this, we make a small shift and turn the recall task into a reasoning one. How does it help? It will help in, gaining, helping us to learn about the student's misconception, which, and as educators, we can do this, like you can use this immediately. And I'll show it in the next slide, how you can
Yeah.
start your chapter with this question, like revisit it midway, close it as a formative diagnostic. And through one question itself, that can guide your teaching across the entire unit.
Also, if teachers, I request everyone to try to think of what it is testing, what is the learning outcome, or what is the testing objective of this question. So it uses geography, it uses physical geography, and it merges it with human geography. That is, you have human environment interaction happening here. It's a very core NEP learning outcome of geography across classes from classes 3 to class 12. Human environment interaction, how human beings interact with the environment around them. So the what the image is trying to say is that you have all these physical features. All the mountains have been given. The Tibetan plateau has been mentioned. The Taklamakan desert has been mentioned. Apart from that, in the second image, if you see, you have major rivers too. And the question is actually joining the physical geography to human geography. That is, which, based on these images, which of the following maps likely shows the regions in China that are highest with the highest population density? Where would be the density, the most dense regions in China? They just have to look at the shaded regions, match it to the regions shown in the stimulus. So where do you think they would be? B, C, A, B, C, D. Where do you think would be the densest? Try to recall what I was talking about riverine civilizations in the beginning. Where would be the densest regions in China? That is what the question is trying to ask. That where you will find the rivers, you'll find people. Where you'll find fresh water, you'll find people. Fresh water to use in the daily use, as well as fresh water to grow crops. And how? And so we have questions like from Drishti ma'am, a question has come in that can you please show some examples of actual classroom tasks and session plans that demonstrate NEP aligned skill based teaching? And I'm just going to show you in the next slide. Please have a look. Also, if you see in the on the screen, we have given you the competency focus, cause and effect. We have also given you the misconception reveal. If students go for A, B, C, what Anda said, it'll tell you that students think that the middle region will be the densest. as well as it's a shift. You have an unfamiliar context here. Anita, over to you. And
Yes.
Nivedita, Drishti ma'am, your answer now, Anita is going to give you an answer to the question.
Yes. So as you can see on the slide, the how do we go from recall checks to reasoning roadmaps? And this sort of final slide will bring us a complete full circle. So what we began today by asking, what do social science students really learn? Now we are ending by showing how a single question used intentionally can become powerful pedagogical roadmap. So let me walk you through this visual
Lesson plan.
before
It basically it's
lesson
your
plan.
lesson plan. Yeah.
Yeah, before starting a chapter on, let's say, landform or ancient riverine civilization or population or even rivers, start such a chapter with curiosity, which is very important because that gives a sense of engagement with the student. Unless we engage, unless we make the student think, they will not move away from their rote learning habits because it's so ingrained in them. So let's say, don't wait until the end of the chapter. Start your unit with a compelling question, even if it's unfamiliar, something intuitive, something visual, like the China population map we just saw, um, uh, or use it as a diagnostic to get students thinking and to surface early assumption. Give them a handout sheet or put it on the board or a chart paper. Ask them to choose the correct option and then ask why they chose the option. See the assumptions they are coming with. So here you have not taught the chapter, you have not really discussed anything in detail. You're just giving them a handout. You're just kind of starting something completely unfamiliar, showing them the image and asking them what do they think after reading the entire question, what do they think is the correct answer? Making them think. It's like when we as adults face an unfamiliar problem, we do problem solving just like that, like pu- put the kid in the water and let's see if they can swim, like babies can swim, they say. So something like that with this, show them something unfamiliar, see what is their response, what is their logic when they are saying an answer, see how do they sort of answer a question without knowing much information about it. Now, after asking the question, noting down the answers of the student, start teaching the chapter. Now, midway from teaching, like after teaching the chapter halfway, um, use this midway to like correct the course. Like midway through your instruction, bring the same question back, not to test, but to check shifts in student thinking. Are misconception clearing up? Are new ones forming? This sort of moment will help you course correct before the end. Ask them again, are your answer choices the same or have they changed? And in case they have changed, ask them why. Ask them the reason for it. Let the responses reveal the reasoning. Only when the students respond, whether on a chart paper or a Google form or a show of hands, look for patterns. Don't just ask who got it right, ask why others didn't. Because that's where the teaching begins. And in the end, when you finish the chapter, and with this instructional action, that go back to the question again. The same question when you start, before you even started the chapter, the same question. And if 90% of your students collectively give the correct answer, your goal is achieved. They have understood the enduring learning outcome that you were trying to teach through this chapter. Here you can tell the students their assumptions and misconception. And finally, use the persistent misconception as the not as a proof of failure, but as clues for follow-ups. If
Hmm.
students still misinterpret river-based settlement patterns, plan a closing activity or discussions before moving on. This is the heart of today's message that questions aren't just for testing, they are for teaching. When well designed, they challenge what students think they know and guide how we teach the next.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just want to add something here as well because that was pretty much a powerful way of creating a lesson plan. You have to think in terms of a lot of terms have been used in when we talk about NAP, like competency-based assessment. It also uses competency-based education. So competency based education, it comes when you think of the end game. That is how you're going to assess it. That's why sometimes we become scared of the questions that we have not seen before. If I'm teaching in my class and there's this fear of the board paper because I have not seen those questions yet. So if the board is shifting, all the boards are shifting now, the entire landscape, I hope that someday that we see such questions in the board papers as well, but we are seeing that change now. Even now we are seeing that change. What I'm trying to say is that if you have taught students in terms of what skills you're going to check, then it becomes a powerful pedagogical practice and a tool in your hand. It's a weapon in your hand. That look at this image of, say, like Nivedita Paul ma'am says, that how can we create activities that help students identify their own biases and assumptions when they are looking at and interpreting historical sources, right? So you pick up a powerful poster, say for example during I'll give you very like, so there is a shift from, if you have looked at the Nirma ads, there's a shift from, you have female names coming up and how they find Nirma to be a useful tool in the houses when they're washing the clothes. Now it actually should shift towards, why can't men wash clothes as well? So shifting the four names that are taken of females or women, you take male names, shift from that. So that is a very powerful tool. And then it becomes a question too, that if you give a picture where some washing powder, it's always a woman sitting over there. During the 80s and 90s, they were sewing machines, and you always had a female sitting there with a sewing machine and teaching something to a daughter. These advertisements are widely available, and you pick that up, and next to it, this is for especially for class 8 teachers, especially for class 10 teachers, where you're teaching gender, caste and religion, where you're teaching gender sensitivity, where you're teaching growing up as girls and boys. That's, I think, in class 7. So once you pick up that image and then you get Sora to create that image for you, you can easily find that image online as well for free, where you have a sewing machine but a man doing it, a man using the sewing machine to to stitch a dress, and say, what do you see, what difference do you see here? What are these messages, that what message do these different posters give you? Such questions ultimately, they can become your allies in teach and shifting your textbook based teaching to very student centering, NEP aligned skill based teaching. If you've given them these posters, these images, and you've used them in your classroom sessions, I guarantee you that once anyone can come in and create a question for you, if students have been introduced to this in the classroom, that there can be a source of historical source of, you can show in the classroom. If you're using these tools in the classroom, in the test, if anyone gives from anywhere, students will not be thrown off from that. They will not be scared of that because they have already been exposed to that during the classroom instructions. So the reason why I showed those questions is because I was a teacher myself and I believe in the power of questions. Questions are pedagogical tools. Please stop thinking of questions as just assessments and they can only check what they have learned. No. Create a brilliant question like that. Ask them that, what do you see in the map? Pick up a map and say that, what can you read from the map? Instead of saying, name the place that has been marked. You can ask that in a fill in the blank as well. The map is of no use there. Give them a Google map. Ask them from A to B if they have to move. In class 5, you give them A to B. You have to. This is a screenshot of a Google map. What directions will you take to go from A to B? I'll go north, then I'll shift towards west, then I'll go now north again, etc., etc., etc. Or I'll go northeast. You can actually give them a real life authentic example of a screenshot of Google Map. That's how you bring those skills, the competency based questions. Competency based question will have a real life context. real life, authentic context, authentic. It has happened somewhere. Bring that news headline in the classroom. In the classroom, while you are teaching in your lesson, that this is the lesson I'm going to start, say on popular struggle or Russian Revolution. This is what happened with the Tsar. There was this group of, and Anastasia is one of the really good movies to show, frankly, during that time. You bring those real life connect in your lesson plan. Start with that. And the way Ananta said that, during critical junctures in lesson planning, and when you're teaching the chapter, ask them the same question again. Ask them the same question towards the end of the chapter. If the 90% of students are able to answer the question correctly, your goal is achieved. That I used a real life authentic question, and this is a real life authentic question where I'm giving a map of China. Now you tell me where people will be. Don't give them the answer, let them think, let them come with their assumptions. Towards the end, ask them the same question again and ask them, now what is the answer? Did you change your answer? Yes, ma'am. I think it's B. Why do you think that, ma'am? Because you will find fresh water over there. Your goal is achieved. Not only have you given them a competency based question, you use that powerful tool as a lesson plan help, as well as you taught based on your entire lesson was competency based lesson plan. I hope that kind of answers Nivedita ma'am's and Dristy ma'am's queries that they came with. So,
Oh,
over to you, Anandita.
okay. So, yes, as now we sort of wrap up, and I want to leave you with a task that's small and specific and is powerfully aligned with everything we have explored today. Think of the next lesson you're going to teach on Monday, and maybe it's on types of government, maybe it's about weather patterns, or it could be causes of French Revolution. I'm just giving you an example. But just take that one question you usually ask, something that is recall based, and reimagine it so that it is challenging to students to think, connect, and reason. See, unless we give our students that exposure that Saika was talking about, of how do we use social science, because social science is all around us. Everything that we are doing is whether we get the right services from the government, whether how our politics is changing our lives, the weather, how it is changing our lives, our job choices, our family choices, everything that we are surrounded with is something that social sciences is actively teaching and is actually students are getting in, is engaging with. So we need to ensure that students can reimagine social sciences so that it's challenging to them, so that they're connecting with them. And with connection, their reasoning will also get sort of, enabled. And this isn't about like an overhauling your entire plan. It's just like
Yeah,
starting with one powerful question.
small change.
And
Yes.
exactly. And because sometimes it's all it takes is like some change, and what students remember is what they understand. So, wishing you a restful, reflective, and a happy Sunday. We are
Also,
just
yeah,
going to,
but they need to wait for the survey. Also, I'm going to give you while you're
yes,
doing I'll be sharing the QR code with you for feedback. I'll give you one example as well of how do you connect competency based skills, and then how do you bring them in your lesson planning, right? So, Anda, I'll just take over here just to
sure.
ask them, please give your valuable feedback. I hope that we can plan another session with you all, so I can give you more such examples of bringing in competency-based skills and questions in the classroom while you're teaching social sciences. How about this? Please do scan what is there on the screen. Until that time that you're filling the form, I will give you one more example that just came to my mind. So Mumbai and Pune recently were flooded, and it's historically Mumbai has Mumbai sees more floods, more severe form of floods than Pune does. um, this I'm giving a bit of a homework here. So this is and you will find these news headlines everywhere. Mumbai gets flooded, Pune gets flooded, how Mumbai has more severe floods, Pune has less severe floods. You will find these newspaper headlines across newspapers, local newspapers in India. Now go back to class 7 And in class 7, geography, students study about the rain shadow region and orographic rainfall. So orograph and Mumbai is along a very important biodiversity hotspot of a country. It's a beautiful place to even explore if you are bird watchers and you want to go into nature, and that's Western Ghats. Now, Western Ghats and Mumbai is specifically placed in some position location along the Western Ghats, and Pune is placed in a very specific strategic place along the Western Ghats. In orographic rainfall, we study winds that strike the mountain, shed a lot of water. The clouds become lighter. They move to the next side of the mountain, and then there is a rain shadow, a leeward side that we call. So you have something real life, authentic news headlines. You have your concepts there, and then you say that okay, so which place would be place Mumbai and Pune along the Western Ghats? Where do you think would be Mumbai in terms of rain shadow area, leeward side, or the sea facing area? If you merge these two, the real life connect and the concept, you have a competency based question. Start your chapter with that because you have a chapter in either class, I think it's class 7, where you have a chapter on rainfall and rains. Even in class 9, you have that chapter on rivers and rainfall. I think it'll be a brilliant way to pull in a competency based question where you're checking spatial understanding, where you're checking the wind patterns around the globe, and you can ask a really powerful question. Stop, don't answer. Use the question strategically placed throughout your lesson plan, throughout your classroom transaction. And towards the end of the lesson, again ask. Now tell me what is the correct answer. I hope that the students give you the correct answer and they have changed their answers. Because the moment the answers are changed, you know that your goal is achieved of having taught the concept with competencies aligned. So, Anita, over to you. Let's wrap up. I enjoyed myself a lot today talking about social sciences. Yeah,
Same here, Saika. I hope this was valuable to all of you, and hopefully, we will again connect and discuss social sciences again.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
thank you so much,
Thank you so
everyone.
much. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.